Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to One Idea Away. As you know, we love to dive into a number of different topics, really all in kind of under that theme of how is it that we can build greater connection to ourselves, to others, to that greater sense of humanity that we have. And we study it from a whole host of different directions. We'll look at mindfulness, we'll look at neuroscience and positive psychology and some of the latest social research and things like that are coming out. One of the views, though, that we really haven't really had the chance to dive into is from the field of anthropology. And so to be able to look at a little bit more of the cultural context and to look at how it is that we've gotten here, I'd love to be able to explore this. And I've got somebody who's got a really unique view, not only from the anthropological side of things, but just from her own life journey and her own life experience of quite literally going from the farm to some of the biggest business in the world. And so it's kind of a fun journey. We're going to get into a conversation today on that, on some of the anthropological view. We're going to talk a bit about gratitude today and the different ways that it's beginning to show up as gratitude in work and the importance of that. So we're going to cover a range of topics, all with this idea of how is it that we continue to learn more about how we connect to self, how we connect to others, and how we connect to that sense of humanity. And so with that, it is my great pleasure and joy to be able to have Martha Bird join us. She is, and I have to say, I don't run into this very often. I actually have job title envy on this one. Martha Bird is a business anthropologist. I don't think I've ever been able to hear that or say that before. Working in ADP's Roseland Innovation Lab. Since receiving her PhD in anthropology, Martha has worked with global brands to create meaningful services, experiences, and products by both questioning and contextualizing the social and cultural dynamics of technology. Today, she supports innovation and global product development to ensure future generations of ADP's human capital management technologies and to make sure that they're informed by the wisdom of human cultures and how everyday encounters really truly unfold to shape new practices and evolve and transform the way that we work. She's a dedicated proponent of energetic curiosity while honoring reality. Martha approaches digital technologies as cultural and social products shaped by regional, technological, and organizational contexts. And with that, I get to welcome Martha Bird to One Idea Away. Martha, how are you?
I'm great, and first I'd like to say thank you. I've been really looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Fantastic. I feel the need to start our conversation with this. What exactly is a business anthropologist?
I think a lot of people use the term, although as you point out, very few people actually get to have that as their official title. So I feel deeply grateful for that. But in my estimation, a business anthropologist um, is a person who has studied academically anthropology. So I have a PhD in anthropology. Um, it's a person who's actually taken the tools of traditional academic anthropology, so the sort of the core things about being open to other cultures, looking for patterns across cultures, understanding how people make meaning with the tools that they use, with the people that they spend time with the practices that they share in, and also the things that are considered normative within their particular group. So it's wonderful that I would say probably for 3 decades now, anthropology has been an active part of a lot of sort of more future-facing companies thinking about how do things like digital tools impact how we even go about our lives? How do they actually change categories of thought? How do they actually alter our imagination on what's possible? And so I get to spend time with people, paying attention to what they're doing, less so about sort of interrogating them about what they're doing, but more so about experiencing and participating in the things that they're involved with. And I do that through through respectful listening, an open heart, and a general interest in the people around me.
Yeah. I think that's interesting because it seems like we're probably at the cross section of some very important work right now in that sense of being able to understand more deeply kind of human culture, the implications of how technology is interacting with us and us with it. And the way that that really is part of shaping, our kind of human journey, both individually as well as culturally. It's something very important. We're seeing that play out in the news in any number of ways nowadays. And so it
Hmm.
seems something that's really kind of at It's a very crucial intersection, I think, for where we are right now.
I mean, one of the things that I would say to that point that I think might be interesting for your listeners,
Yeah,
as an example, is, I think of technologies, dating back thousands of years. So not just
yeah,
simply the
yeah.
technologies of the mobile phone and
Mhm,
smartphones and all that. But think about. I'll give you two examples. Think about the incandescent light bulb.
mm,
So when Edison developed that, the ability for people to actually flip a switch and have something be illuminated. Not only was the technology that changed sort of the physical environment that people
mhm,
found themselves in, but it changed whole categories of notions around privacy, right? So there is a cultural shift there, and and I think the same kind of going forward around like Google Maps.
mhm,
So in the past, you could potentially have pulled out a map from your glove box in your car. You would say, okay, I'm here, I need to follow this route, I need to go through these places, I may have to stop here, and so you plan ahead and you sort of have these points along the way. But today, I mean, I think a lot of us use, Google Maps, and we basically we know where we're starting and we know where we're ending, and that has a lot of impact and implication for what happens in between.
mhm.
So, I do know people who say I'm not going to use Google Maps because I'd actually like to pull over and ask somebody where's the best place for lunch, or
Yeah,
and to have that kind of that connectivity. So
yeah.
I think these things have these rippling effects that I find personally super fascinating.
Yeah. So one of the other things I've heard in maybe a previous interview or talk you were giving, you've described yourself as an open-hearted pragmatist. And I'm
Hmm.
curious about this because those are I can see where that may not always be in agreement, meaning the idea of being open-hearted and the idea of pragmatism. And I was just
Hmm.
wondering if you could speak a little bit to that of, when you say open-hearted pragmatist, what does that really look like and how do you use that to navigate through, through life and through work?
So when I think for me, like when I think of being pragmatic, I come from really hardworking New England people, and I would say that part of this pragmatism also has to do with these two other words that I was thinking about today in preparation for our conversation. I'm a putterer and I'm industrious. And so,
Mm,
and I also am a meanderer. So I'll add three there. So, um, those things are not, I'm fully grounded in the world in that pragmatic way. I know that in order to get things done, you have to expend energy
mhm,
in order to do that. It's just not. I'm not going to just think about it and it will happen. There is a certain. I have a hand in what I do. I've had a hand both physically in what I've done, and I think we probably will touch upon the fact that I
mm,
have was a farmer for a very long time, so I know what it is to actually do work in that sort of hands-on way. But I'm open-hearted to the extent that I actually feel a deep, and it's been actually exponentially growing as I've gotten
mhm,
older. But I feel a deep respect for those people around me. I'm fortunate that I seem to, as time's gone on, attract extremely stellar individuals, people with good intentions, people
mhm,
with kind hearts as well. And so I get to be both, grounded and of this space that we call, our life on Earth, and yet also have the confidence and the respect for those around me to be able to have these connections that just sort of come up, and they get, it's more and more all the time. So I'm actually somewhat overwhelmed by by the generosity of the universe that I am, I find myself in.
I like that. And I'm curious because when you mention even that word wanderer and
Mm,
is that part of the perspective is that and I know this is also part of your journey, but I've got to imagine that the part of you that's a wanderer is the part of you that while pragmatism say, okay, it's time to move forward, wanderer probably gives you a little bit more curiosity and patience that
mm,
allows for some of maybe the open-hearted space to yield a new solution that still stays pragmatic, still moves forward, but it gives you kind of a very interesting, maybe yin yang sort
Hmm.
of path.
Yeah, it's funny because I think about a metaphor that a friend of mine shared with me many years ago. He said, it's might be useful to think of yourself as a cork on the water. So I generally am. I go with the current. I look at the shoreline paths. I move along. But every once in a while, you've got to kind of put up, put down your rudder and do a little steering, maybe pop up your sail and you steer away. But the general background of it all is that I'm a cork. And I think that is exactly what what
Yeah.
you're kind of getting at with this, the wandering and the pragmatism. I think, I know how to be buoyant. I know how to move with the flow. But if it's necessary, I know how to pop up my sail and also pull down my rudder.
Very cool. So let's talk a little bit about that journey then. That's because we on the one side I introduced this incredible background of the work you're doing with ADP, and you've worked with some other really big name companies and things like that. But your story begins in the soil, and so
Hmm.
I was wondering if you could kind of take us back a little bit of where the roots, the seeds, perhaps to say it that way, of the journey begin, and what was the upbringing like?
Yeah. It's interesting because I actually came to farming. It was through a family farm, but it was not my direct family. It was my great grandmother's farm. So I was the one person within my immediate family that was like, I really like the idea of waking up early and smelling the soil and feeling the dew and putting the plow on the back of the tractor. And it appealed to a lot of things. Partially, it appealed to, as I said earlier, the sort of handy. I like to have my hand in things, and so
Mm,
and being handy. And so, running a farm, you get to do things like repair roofs and fix glow plugs on tractors and polish harrow tines and plant seeds. And
yeah,
so I actually started doing that as a sort of as a in between college, on this time off, summers in college.
mhm,
And then I realized I actually really liked it a lot. And um, I, received my BA in art history and philosophy, and I had made a decision very early on. Actually, I had started my academic career in the School of Management, and I
mm,
realized after about 6 months that really wasn't going to be what I planned to do. And I think one of the things that your podcast do touch on, and I think maybe I amplify this in a sense, is that you know I think a life well lived is a life lived fully present to your own to the things that you feel passionate about. And so my decision to get out of this business setting and go into art history and philosophy, and then ultimately say, you know what, I think I just want to be a farmer.
yeah,
Not just be a farmer, but I think I
yeah,
want to be a farmer. um so I did that for 12, 15 years,
mm,
and at the same time I thought, well, it's a long winter. I should probably do something with my mind when I'm not, I'm chopping down trees and doing the other things that one does in preparation for the following season. That's the other thing too, Luke. Of course,
yeah,
is that there is this wonderful cycle and seasonality of farming that is also lessons for our life, right? That we do need to prepare the field of ourselves and the things around us in order for things to grow. It does take tending, it does take care, it does take attention. I think those are things that I've tried to, um, you know, exact in my life outside of the farm,
yeah,
outside of actual farming. But so simultaneously, I was fortunate to receive a fellowship and was able to work on my PhD for about 10 years while also running the farm in the summer, spring, and fall. So that was kind of my deal there. And it's interesting because as a metaphor, I think the farm is really rich with those. But for me particularly,
yeah,
it has mirrored my life beautifully. And the metaphor that I think of is the metaphor of the compost pile, which is
mm, mm,
I when someone I actually interviewed with a company years ago, and they said, well, I had to do this big, wolf pack type interview, and I had lots of people in front of me, and they said, "Well, how would you describe yourself?" And I said, "Well, I would describe myself as a compost pile." And so they're looking at me like, well, "What does that, all about?" And I said, "It's like, you go through, you use things, you test things out, you throw them on the pile, and over the course of time."
Yeah.
The space of the pile gets larger, and the time, and it also becomes sort of a stratification of time, right? So every once in a while you got to go out, as in any compost pile, and check it and make sure it's not exploding, or it's going to go on fire, or something's going on there. And then sometimes you say, yeah, well, that looks useful.
Yeah.
Maybe I can reuse that, and then you recycle from the pile,
Yeah.
ideas that you might have had, thoughts that you might have had, lessons that you might have had, and then you spread them out, and hopefully, like good compost, it's fertilizer for your continued growth.
And something else, actually, I just, because you bring up the issue, or the idea of seasonality and the cycle that happens to be there, I also find it very interesting that, for that period of time, even the description you're giving with compost, is that so much of your time that you spent enriching your mind and enriching what would become a further career was done during winter, right? And this is the
Yes.
crucial season that many of us don't really reflect a lot on in our lives. It's actually the times of winter, meaning the times of decay, the time where life is not flourishing in all these different directions, but that serves a really, really powerful purpose for us. We can enrich, we can allow it to layer. We can use those times in our lives because it's actually the winter that gives way to the spring, and such, and so forth.
Hmm.
So it's interesting that you used that period of time in that way, in addition to, like you said, all of the incredible metaphors that can be drawn out of a farm and out of nature.
Yeah, I think, I think it's sometimes, particularly as our attention is really grabbed, frequently now, I'm a big believer in the restoration of seasonality, and exactly as you
Yes.
describe it,
Yeah.
right? I think restoration
Mm.
is super important for the body, and the spirit, and the mind.
I would, yeah, and it's again that this takes us down a slightly different path. I'll mention something and then we'll wind our way around here, but I really appreciate that just this idea that we probably don't pay as much mind to the seasonality within our lives the way that we could, and that there is time for restoration. There's time for all these different things, and I think we get caught up in that cultural context, certainly nowadays, thinking that everything needs to be summer and harvest, summer and harvest, summer and harvest, over and over
Right.
and over again, and we don't take the time for rejuvenation. We don't necessarily take the time to plant new seeds for whatever reason, and there's a whole lot of reasons, psychologically and culturally, that we can get into for that. But I think that's an interesting observation, that we
Mm.
need, to pay attention to the rhythm and the harmony of what's actually going on as a backdrop of our lives.
Yeah, I think that's, again, and I know that you are a fellow traveler in this
Mhm.
space, but it's this sort of notion of really being mindful and present to ourselves and
Yeah.
those around us.
So what was it that brought you specifically into anthropology? Was it what was a turning point? What was it that just said, yeah, this is really where I'd love to study and learn so much more? What drew you that
Mm.
way?
Well, I would like to say that it was this sort of like passion that I followed, but
Right.
it's a bit more pragmatic than that. I had been accepted into study in sociology, and it turned out that my philosophical beliefs, and that of my, at that time, extremely famous advisor,
Mhm.
uh, we parted ways at some point, and I basically said, I think that, thank you so much, this
Mhm.
has been super productive for me, but I don't see this as I can't sustain
Yeah.
a position that doesn't make sense for me. So we broke up, and then I found a wonderful anthropologist who said, "Oh, Martha, come with us, come to anthropology." And I think in the very beginning, I think for as a child, I always was open to different people. I was always interested
Mhm.
in meaningful connection. So both sociology and anthropology offered a
Yeah.
extended and focused way to have a meaningful to meaningfully interact with people. So that was sort of just not, I think, my personality or whatever. So
Mhm.
I then went into anthropology, and yeah, it all makes sense for me. And it's like so many things in my life, and part of this wandering life and this core uh, metaphor is that I kind of find myself in these flows, and then it's like, in retrospect, as I look back,
Mhm.
it's like, wow, that all was perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the, that perspective of we get to connect the dots when we look behind us and we look at the journey that we've been on, and
Right.
see this kind of wonderful little pattern that has developed. And I it's interesting you even say it that way, because obviously that's part of anthropology.
Right.
So there's a personal anthropology that is there as well. You
Yeah.
know,
No, it's many layered anthropological life I have.
so what was it then that in you go down this field of study, and then interestingly enough you walked away from an education in business many years prior, and you go into philosophy and art, and then you're on the farm, and now you're in anthropology, and you find yourself back in the middle of business. And
Yep.
so what wove the, how did the path wind to wander
Yeah.
you in that direction?
Well, I think one of the things that, and again, I think it goes back to this pragmatism, and then also the open-hearted part, is that I had never imagined myself actually being an academic anthropologist,
Right.
despite the fact that, my trajectory was really sort of heading me in that direction. But I never made that. I never actually, I never made those promises either to myself or to other people. And partially because I felt like, it was too stratified. It was a life away from. It
Yeah.
wasn't. I wasn't in the kind of level of connectivity that I wanted to be in. And frankly, I could make a better living, in a business setting. Although that wasn't my main priority. I actually fell in love, and then found myself in San Francisco. So, again, love has always brought me to where I need to be. Love and then change, right? Love and
Mm.
change. It's dotted me all over the globe. So I moved to San Francisco, and I became aware of a group called the Ethnographic Praxis and Industry organization, which I went to several of the founding conferences. One was held at Intel, one at Microsoft, and I became part of a community of other academic anthropologists who had made
Mm.
the choice to work in business settings. And so that's where that all started, sort of out in Silicon Valley,
Mhm.
and then I just kind of floated along from there.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think it's, and I hope that we're seeing, maybe more and more of this, but it seems that there are different lines of study, whether it be anthropology and social sciences and different forms of social psychology and things like that. We're seeing it begin to inform and be much more integrated into the way that we work, into the way that we build our organizations, into more of the fabric of our lives. And I appreciate that, because it takes what, some of the incredible work that's happening from an academic standpoint and a research standpoint, but then it's the application thereof, so that we can really
Hmm.
truly begin to embed things in the way we're working, the way we're living, the way we're relating, from that
Hmm.
standpoint forward. It seems like that. I don't know. I could be wrong on the actual stats of it, but it just seems like it's more prevalent today than it had been in years past.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I think is super important about the academic
Mhm.
part of this is that it isn't a matter, because I get people saying, "Oh, I'd love to do what you do. I can spend time with people, and I can hang out with them deeply and ask questions and be curious." And I think we all can. And I think one of the roles of people like myself, and I have associates and colleagues who also are proponents of this, is that we should really take on a mentoring role to
Yeah,
help people
yeah,
think like an anthropologist, but they can't be an anthropologist. I mean, an anthropologist really brings with them, a body of
yeah.
knowledge, a body of
Sure.
literature, a body of things that they then apply to these
That's just really
situations.
that's really interesting. I just did another interview with Dr. Niobe Way, and interestingly enough, part of what they're right now doing is actually teaching in the education field, as well as all the way students right as down as young as 12 years old, different forms of interviewing, so that because of what it does build in the way of connection, curiosity, understanding, so that we begin to relate to one another in a very, very different capacity, as opposed to, most of our conversations that tend to stay relatively surface level. We don't want to probe, we don't want to be nosy, or what have you. But it's
Hmm.
interesting you say that, because there are a lot of skills. While it may not have the background and expertise from an anthropology background, there's some of the skills that are associated there that we probably would go a long way to implement inside of our lives.
Yeah, I think it's critical. I think one of the things I'm really proud about, proud about being an anthropologist around, is this fundamental notion of empathy, of curiosity, of introspection, of self-examination, so that we can sort of, before we start to engage with people, that we actually take account of our own biases and perspectives,
Mhm.
so that we can, not so that we can remove them, because that's not possible, but so that we can acknowledge them and be attend to them. So
Absolutely.
I think all
Yeah.
these kinds of skills are super, more and more, I think, as you say, I think becoming subjects of interest to
Yeah.
people in the job market for sure.
Yeah. So, one of the areas, and you and I had chatted a little bit about this offline. One of those areas that you've kind of been looking at in terms of culture and the way that it shows up is this issue of gratitude, because
Mm,
it's part of, it's something that we're seeing emerge in a variety of different research that is out there. But you've specifically been looking at it in the context of work culture, and the way in which gratitude is actually something that is very, very important to us in that regard. And so I was just kind of, let me ask this. At what point did you become interested or begin to notice that gratitude was something that you wanted to kind of look further into, to see the implications that it had for us?
yeah, I think it started with this whole notion around engagement that's become
Mm,
so sort of like a sort of a catchphrase
yeah, that's
now, but um, it's several years ago, all you could, really, and anything you to turn to read relative to workplace culture was around engagement. How do we create engagement? What is
right.
engagement? Okay, well, what is engagement? What does that actually mean? And so I thought, okay, that actually just means to be consistently energized. That means to be feeling like you belong. That means to be feeling that you're respected. That means to be
Mhm,
feeling that you're inspired. And so these sorts of things. And I thought, okay, but how do you actually get those feelings? How do those feelings actually come to you? What helps to support and foster those? And I thought, well, gratitude does, a feeling of
mhm,
gratitude. Also, I think pride in what you do is
mhm,
important. And I'm very interested in this notion of pride. Uh, but 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 gratitude sort of fosters a lot of those things, because if someone is grateful for your work, then that's that you take that into your heart, and if you're grateful for other people, then you're
mhm,
exchanging those things. But I think one of the things that I found when I began to think about this sort of on my own was, I've worked in a lot of environments around the globe where people's approach to thanks
mhm.
are really expressed differently. And I'm sure you have seen this in your own work
Sure.
abundantly. And, so I was thinking back about the time, because you read things in the popular press around, oh, we need to say thank you more. And it's thank you goes a long way. And thank you can do that. And then I'm thinking, yeah, but I've worked in places where people don't say thank you. It isn't
Mm,
culturally a part of the daily discourse of work life, or even family life. So it made me start to think, okay, I think thank you as a sort of Western expression of a form
mhm,
of gratitude. I think in many times
mhm,
it's a one that doesn't come with a deep intention. I think intentionality of action is really where gratitude comes from. So so I began to sort of explore on my own, how do different cultures actually express gratitude? And I think there's a huge area of opportunity for further work. around the workplace and expressions of gratitude. I
Yeah.
think that there doesn't seem to be a lot, at least in my, in looking at the literature, over the last 6, 7 months, I haven't seen a lot in that area. So I'm
Mhm.
hoping to actually do more on that because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, sort of between cultures around that. So, for instance, if you're a Russian or a Ukrainian who happens to be working in the U.S. With predominantly Americans or perhaps Indians and Chinese, your way of acknowledging your team or your way of thanking them for their work wouldn't likely be, "Oh, thank you for doing that. That is great, awesome work." It's not.
Mhm.
That's not the way it's going to come down.
Mhm.
It may be something that shows up like a wildfire in some other place. So I just think, I think there's a lot of room for awareness,
Yeah.
especially in global, in these large global companies, how different people express gratitude.
Well, it's interesting because I mean, there's a few things that start to pop into my head, and I'm kind of curious for your thoughts on some of this. Part of what you just shared, and in terms of obviously this is cross cultural, but there's a degree of almost even a social emotional awareness that ties into this as well, right? So that we can approach things as, okay, I'm going to give gratitude, appreciation, thanks truly from what it is that I know, which is kind of unilateral and not necessarily socially emotionally intelligent, because we're only doing it from one view. And yet, the more that we tune into others and kind of see what they respond to, don't respond to, or otherwise, we can start to, we don't need. I guess my point is we don't need a little playbook necessarily. Do this in this culture, do this in that culture. Sure, those are maybe some nice best practices to tip us
Hmm.
off, but at the end of the day, it's being socially and emotionally aware and attentive to what's in front of you and responding to
Hmm.
that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think it's a an awareness that we are, at least, and this is my lived experience, that we're all, we share some very fundamental human things. We share
Mm.
some very this is transcultural. Um, we want to be close to our friends and family. We want to be, acknowledged and recognized. We want to be part of communities of shared purpose. And I think I think once there's a understanding that we're in this family of man, then it's easier, I think, to do exactly what you've just recounted, which is this whole idea of having the emotional and social capacity to not try to model people, to not
Yeah.
try but to actually to allow space for, right. And I think at least I hope for my own life that I've just become better at allowing space for.
Yeah. Well, and I think even because it's something else that you said, and it triggered this to me is, and I think this is part of even just your own background of the anthropology, anthropological background, and things like that. There's an element of gratitude to me that I would equate with seeing. And what I
Hmm.
mean is, right, is this sense of being able to really truly see and to acknowledge what's there in your life, what's there in this person or this team or this moment. And that when we're able to take notice of that, it feels like that's going to connect us more to what's actually unfolding in our life and in our lives. And so, I guess maybe, curious from your own perspective, but these are all these like little tiny micro elements, I guess I would say that I feel like are tied into gratitude, and that really truly that acknowledgement, that being present, that seeing of what's really
Hmm.
truly there in front of you and acknowledging it, calling it out in whatever way, and in probably multiple different ways to see what matches so that somebody can
Hmm.
actually feel or receive what it is that we're trying to acknowledge and appreciate.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. I think, for me, at least in my own life, I feel like, you know being able to be able to receive things that are, not as positive, things that are positive, to be able to actually be receptive to and learning from, things that are more challenging, or
Yeah.
things that I wouldn't have, wished upon myself. But I've as I've gotten along on this journey further,
Yeah.
I am able to say, I know that this is here to, help me. I don't want to say lesson because that seems like
Yeah.
it seems a bit, it's not really a lesson. It's an energetic, they're energetic moves, right?
Yeah.
And I think they all of these little energetic moves bring you along. And I guess for me, the best sort of outcome for all of this is to be like, I'm happy to where I've been brought along too.
I really appreciate that. Here we are with gratitude, right? I really appreciate is that
Mhm.
there's an element also, though, that I'm really glad that you highlighted of gratitude is not only for the warm and fuzzy, the rosy and rainbows, right? It's
Right.
it's actually what you're describing it as is more a way of being, a way of living, right? A way of working, a way of relating. Because I also heard in that gratitude embracing whatever it is that happens to be present, whatever it is that you happen to be acknowledging that's coming forward. And that part of embracing it, when you embrace it from an attitude of gratitude, it's that you're embracing it because you believe that it's there and it can serve a purpose. That
Hmm.
it's being presented to you, at the moment, the person, the situation, whatever it is being presented to you as sort of a gift. And you're going to receive it because there is some purpose to be created from this or found in this at any given time. So I'm just curious. Again, curious how that sits with you, but really whether or not you think of gratitude as a way of being, because that's what I heard from you.
Yeah, and it's interesting because now as we're talking,
Yeah.
these some things are coming together, and one of the things is, going back to this whole sort of cork metaphor.
Hmm.
If you think of gratitude for both the highs and lows, right, and sort of this openness to that, I think about a wave, right? And so you've
Hmm.
got peaks and troughs of a wave, and it's that
Yeah.
wave that moves that cork. And so I think
Mm,
both the highs and lows are they all they come together to move you
yeah.
along.
Yeah.
And yeah, I like that. So I thank
Yeah.
you for that. I hadn't thought of it that way before.
But and again, I appreciate the wave metaphor there, and I'll go back to the idea of seasons. If I were to ask anybody their favorite season, we're probably all going to have one or two that really stand out for us. But it's an appreciation of whatever season you're in. And that to
Hmm.
me, what you just described with the wave is just to be recognizing that this is where I am. This is the cycle of where it is that I am. I'm grateful for this moment in time. I'm grateful for it being presented and where I happen to be. Doesn't mean that you don't do anything about it. Doesn't mean that you don't change. Doesn't mean that you don't move forward. It's a different way of meeting the moment, and
Hmm.
that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the words that I've really in life has resonated with me very deeply is the word dwelling.
Mm,
And it resonates with me on a number of levels, but one of them is it's a verb, right? You're dwelling I'm dwelling
yeah.
in. It's a dwelling. It's a noun, so it's a place where you live. And I like to think of myself as in a state of dwelling. I'm both present
Mm.
unto myself as a noun, and I'm also dwelling as in action and agency. So there's something about that really speaks to me. I like to think of myself as a moving center of my life.
Mm. Say more about. Yeah, I've got it. Say please that moving center of your life.
Yeah. Um,
Please elaborate on that.
yeah, I feel like, you know, I feel, first of all, I feel like I've been deeply blessed by a generous universe. And
Mhm.
so I feel privileged to be speaking with you. Feel privileged to be able to share my ideas. And so I understand that about my my subjectivity, my reality. But with that said, it's like when I think about being in the moving center, it's like I'm not fragmented. I bring me where I go. Um, I am solid and and autonomous unto myself. Um, I think the moving center part is the interesting thing because obviously there's a periphery to all of this. but I am at the core of my being. I am at the core of my being, and I think being at the core of your being allows you, at least for me, in my
Mhm.
experience, it allows me to be more embracing of things outside of the of my center,
Mhm.
right? Because I'm fully in my center. There's no
Yeah.
threat to anything there. That's
Yeah.
just kind of what it is. And yeah, I wish that for everybody, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
Luke, because I think it's a beautiful way to be.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I wanted you to elaborate, because what strikes me, and it's a wonderful phrase. I've never quite heard it put that way, but it's, to me, it's that recognition. You say, at the very core of your being, I think of it as is the home within, right? It's that seat within each of us that is very deep. It's very true. It's the very essence of who we are. And when we can move from there, and we can move with that into the different experiences and moments and relationships within our life, we're going to connect in a completely different way. And we're going to connect in a
Mm,
very genuine and authentic and very trusting and very truthful kind of way. And to me, also, what I heard in that, I love the fact that the very first thing in explaining that was that you went to gratitude,
mhm,
feeling blessed to be where you are and to have what you have, and to have had the journey that you've had. And I guess I'm curious, before we begin to wrap up, is it, to me, it seems like that way of being, that gratitude way of being, is something that's helped you become much more at peace, much more accepting of, and much more recognizing of what that moving center is for you.
mm. Oh, definitely. And I always say this when I do a lot of internal and external speaking
Yeah.
engagements, and typically in business settings, and I say, if you want the greatest return on investment, then practice of gratitude. And because I think once, if you practice gratitude, I think ultimately you're going to see it in your life more,
Yeah.
because everything takes practice. And it becomes it becomes the new normal for
Yeah.
you. And so I think the exponential return is just so incredible. I think, it's interesting because one of the things that I had contemplated at one point was I felt so overwhelmed by gratitude, that I had so
Mm.
much gratitude that it was almost like, I wouldn't want to say it was a burden, but
Mm.
I do think that there is a certain kind of weightiness to
Mm.
being so grateful,
Yeah.
and then and the way around that, is to give it away,
Yeah.
and to share it. And if that's going to be the recycling of my being, across this time and later, I think I feel really excited about it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I guess maybe just to wrap up, I'm just kind of curious, with this type of perspective, meaning the being connected to the center of who you are, the gift that gratitude has been in your life, and the way of being that you have, the view that you have as an anthropologist. I'm just kind of curious, what is your hope for the impact of your work, and the impact of you doing and being connected to the things that you are?
It's funny because I am not aspirational by nature, so my hopes tend to be quite local.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that really keeps me going in my work and makes me really excited is when I do meet with people, or I do a speaking engagement, or I introduce ideas around thinking about humans, and human-centered thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is that someone comes up to me and says, "Wow, I never thought of it that way," or or getting people to actually question their own assumptions and look out of the corner of their eye, see things peripherally. If I can help foster looking, if I can help to foster a greater amount of like understanding amongst people, that that's that's what I'm working for.
Outstanding. Martha, thank you for being here. Thank you so much for joining us on One Idea Way, and sharing your insights, your experience, your journey, your work with us. And it's been our pleasure. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Luke. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. For everybody, I'd go back and just pay attention to the ways in which, there's a few different things. One is the ways in which gratitude happens to be showing up for you and in your life. To think about, how you are bringing that forward in terms of your own state of being. The way that helps you maybe find that center, that core of very much of who you are, And honestly, something that I think that Martha exemplifies, which is that when you've got a certain way of being and you're trying to help open that understanding, that lens, that peripheral sight to so many others, is to just know, whether it's locally, globally, or otherwise, you're anchoring a new energy, anchoring a new perspective that means something to every single person that you come into contact with. And so I encourage you to use that gratitude, to find that center, to find that core, and then anchor that into your life, meaning to be a representation of that, to exemplify that, because it will have a ripple effect across all those that you touch. And so, as always, I want to thank you for stopping in on One Idea Away. And until next time, continue to enjoy the journey. Thank you. Check out IPEC's coach training program at ipeccoaching.com/OIA. And of course, to find out about all the conversations, events, gatherings, all the things that we've got upcoming, then head on over to oneideaaway.com/community. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have, please do us the favor of subscribing, reviewing the show, as well as sharing insights or comments that stood out for you in this episode.